I did keep thinking down that second half, Arsenal fans, like, looking at each other being like, and now Manchester City decide to take a game off?
I'd extend that to Liverpool fans as well. It felt pretty galling to everybody, to the extent that it was possible to wonder, were City trolling Liverpool and Arsenal? Was it a way of saying, we should have lost at any point? And we didn't.
This is the Men in Blazers video podcast presented by the GFOPs at Camarena, the most awarded tequila. It's Memorial Day weekend, the American national holiday designed to celebrate a Saturday and Sunday jam-packed with Wembley action. The FA Cup yesterday, shocko shocks. United can play so bloody well when they're not forced to take the field in a stadium with a very leaky roof. Then, today, welcome back Southampton, old friend to the Premier League, dropping poor Leeds United in the Championship playoff. It's a cruel, cruel game. We also had the Women's Champions League final yesterday. Silverware flying to all points this weekend. We'll talk about all of the above, as well as what the hell's going on with Pochettino, Ten Hag, Vonson Company, and possibly the most insane managerial merry-go-round of all time. It's Memorial Day weekend. And I can think of few finer ways to spend it than by firing up the proverbial footballing barbecue, cracking a beer or three, and breaking down this feast of football with, from your New York Times, it's the Maureen Dowd of goals. It's my friend, it's Mr. Rory Smith.
Is that a thing I want to be? That probably is a thing I want to be, isn't it?
The Maureen Dowd of goals?
Yeah.
Well, I think she had a good foot on her back in the day.
I can see her trotting in from the left.
Yeah, like a New York Times Iron Robin. Raw, You sound remarkably chipper, all considering. I've got to first of all open up with commiserations to your local team, Leeds United. How is it in your neck of the woods? I imagine scenes of mourning all over your city. Are they smashing up bus stops and burning the owner San Francisco 49ers shirts all over Leeds as we speak?
What you've got to remember about Leeds, Rog, is that Leeds is not a city that likes to wear its heart on its sleeve. It likes, in the traditional fashion, to bury its feelings and allow them to sort of fester and bubble and boil and pour out later in unexpected ways. And it's also it's a complicated thing, isn't it? Tribalism. So I, this afternoon, took my little boy to our local rugby league team, the Keighley Cougars, who he is an ardent fan of. And Keighley is 15 miles from Leeds, so it should be, by American standards, that is Leeds territory. And the Tudors won, big top of the table clash against Oldham. And afterwards, a fella sat near us said, "Do you know what? It's been a great weekend. Tudors won, Celtic won, and Leeds lost."
as if 15 minutes away, Leeds is a completely different city.
Yep. This is not Leeds territory, or certainly not uniformly Leeds territory. It is disappointing. It is a blow for the city. Personally, I think it's a bit of a shame for the Premier League. The Premier League's better when Leeds is in it. But Leeds' record in the playoffs is abysmal. So I don't think those thousands who went down to London today, they were travelling very much in hope rather than expectation.
They knew they were travelling to their own doom.
Yeah.
Like a doomed 1920s attempt to cross the Antarctic. They knew, we're going, lads. Most probably going to freeze to death, but let's go and have the time of our life. That's what football's about, failure and repression. Raw. Let's dive into both of those things. But before we break down all that is to come, I want to start with a toast, raising my third first Michelob Ultra of the day to Barcelona Femini, who capped off an almost perfect year, a quadruple year. Barcelona women have had more joy this year than I think Everton have had in about the past 25 years. They won the Champions League 2-0 against Lyon. Cacophonous scenes. Crowd of over 50,000 in Bilbao. Goals from the two titans who are most associated with the Barcelona way, Aitana Bonmati and the quite majestic Alexia Putellas. 32-year-old wunderkind manager Jonathan Heraldez now moves to take over the Washington Spirit on our shores. Honestly, exactly what our nation needs. Elite coaching in this country. I broke down the game at the final whistle with Sam Newish. You can find our analysis on both pod and YouTube in the women's game feed, and it is quite good even though I'm on it. But Raw, you wrote a feature on the impact of Barcelona women who become a gold standard for women's club football just when the men's team has imploded. In your words, which you can find on the front page of your New York Times, you wrote the following. You said, the number of registered female soccer players in Catalonia has doubled in the past 6 years. It's expected to grow exponentially in the decade to come. There are more coaches, more clubs, more teams, more games, more leagues. Raw, when I read that, I was thrilled. I was also, as an American fan, terrified because you project that forward. It's frightening and remarkable about the talent gap that we're going to have to catch up to or keep up with as Americans.
Yeah, there's a real virtuous circle element to what's happening in Catalonia. And the people that I spoke to when I went to Barcelona and to kind of the surrounding towns, they all kind of said, annoyingly, obviously as a journalist, you want there to be a nice, simple explanation that you can put into a headline. But they said that a lot of it they think is to do with a kind of much slower breakdown of social convention. So there's the idea that soccer is just for boys hasn't really been true for a generation. That's not how people have seen it. Obviously, it was never true, but the perception of it has fallen away over the last generation, and they think they are seeing the benefit of that as well. But there's no question that the success of Barcelona has fed into that and accelerated it. And what's really interesting is that it's happening at the same time as the men's team are a shadow of their former selves. And it's been a real economic boost for the club. It's been a real kind of psychological boost for the club, I think, as well, to see that Barcelona is still a crucible of excellence, just happens to be the women rather than the men. And it does mean that I think there's a cycle starting where you will have a greater proportion of girls playing soccer in Catalonia and therefore in Spain than you probably do elsewhere, which will give them an inbuilt advantage. And the US had that advantage for a long time. And you wonder now whether maybe Spain is going to get it.
To the lesser men's football, let's start at Wembley Stadium Saturday, awash with sunlight, packed full of Mancunians or wannabe Mancunians for the 143rd FA Cup final. That fading showcase a wonder won, and this is not a typo, by Manchester United, who triumphed over Manchester City 2-1 in quite surreal circumstance, which we'll unpack archaeologically. Because this was from the outset a clash between the United, once the gold standard, now tarnished, almost fool's gold, against the new powerhouse, their once little brother, a joke of a club who have proven, and then some, that he who laughs last, longest, laughing even at the 115 charges that have been levelled against them. United first, Raw, really a sagging United coming into this one after a season of darkness and turmoil. An FA Cup across their cross-town rivals, which honestly offered less redemption, more the pattern of misdirection. 8th place league finish, their lowest since 1990. Continuing their 11-year title drought in the wrong direction. And news crackled out the day before that win or lose, according to reports, Manchester United's manager/press pinata, Erik Ten Hag, would be relieved of his managerial duties. This would be his last stand. Really, when it came out, it felt like a ruthless decision. It felt like a complete distraction. And we'll talk about the big picture managerial turmoil, which is a massive issue in football right now in a moment. Honestly, football's become too much about managerial decisions and ownership changes. This is the modern world. But pre-game Ten Hag, he looks so bedraggled. It's not about me, he said. It's about the team. Raw, what a send-off. At best, bungled. At worst, cruel. How did this all come out the day before? Was it planned, or was it the result of other managers' agents' loose lips sinking ships?
I think probably more column B than column A. So, as you mentioned, there has been this sort of merry-go-round suddenly whirling into action. There's all these vacancies everywhere. There's a relatively small pool of candidates. And what happens is when there's a relatively small pool of candidates, journalists dig their teeth into those candidates and they worked the people close to them in the hope of finding out, for example, who might be the new Chelsea manager. And I suspect what's happened is that in the course of those investigations, that's a slightly overly dramatic word, basically, I suspect what's happened is someone at United has said to one of the people that they are considering as a replacement for Ten Hag, well, he's going whatever happens, so there's going to be a vacancy. That person, I suspect, is also in the running for one or two of the other jobs that are available, the reporters who are covering those stories have then got wind of it. Just someone's let it slip that Ten Hag's going. I know what you mean about the timing. It did feel cruel. It felt counterproductive. United do have form for this. They did it to Louis van Gaal in whatever year it was that he won the FA Cup.
He found out on the field after he just won it, didn't he?
Yeah, someone going up to him, one of the owners or the executives going up to him, and I presume effectively saying, "Well, Louis, that's a nice way to say goodbye," and him just going, "I beg your pardon," but in Dutch. So it did feel a little bit like it's from the United playbook. At the same time, I'd be lying if I said it was a shock.
If you go back through our conversations over the past couple of weeks, agonising conversations, fairly degrading conversations that has been coming. I love the way you use the word investigative reporting by sports journalists, making them all sound as if they're Mark Ruffalo in Spotlight. But God bless, the FA Cup had been United's sole respite on this season. Quarter-final win over Liverpool, a narrow semi-final win over Had You Right in Coventry. But it was City fans who surged coming into the game seconds before kickoff. It was they who turned their backs on the match. They did the Poznan, almost declaring victory before the game had even begun. Their team hadn't lost since December the 6th. And you got to credit United. They made it past the 12-second mark when they conceded last year to Gundogan. I was quite fascinated by the early exchanges. City dominated. Pep standing there, always ahead of the football trends. Clearly, I think bemused, frustrated by Sean Dyche leaning into his football casual territory. And so Raw countering with the suit, which was an astonishing tactical tweak from a gent who's been dragging managerial style into sloppy sweats for the past couple of seasons. Number one, he's a handsome bastard. Number two, he looked a bit like he was rehearsing his outfit for when the 115 charges are being met in court. But how did you understand it?
Well, I think it does it not further lend weight to the theory that Sean Dyche's tracksuit has magical powers?
That it can even oust Pep from his Athleto leisure wear haven. Well,
I don't want to kind of take this too seriously, Rog, but if we accept that
take it seriously enough, Raw.
It is clearly true that Everton were rescued from relegation by Sean Dyche's tracksuit. We have accepted that the psychological switch in the players to see that Sean Dyche was either, I don't know, like relaxed or working hard, or however they interpreted it, that has made the players feel, okay, look, if he's doing that, then we can lift our games too. It's raised spirits. It's changed the mindset. If we accept that is an unimpeachable truth, then does it not follow that Guardiola going more sort of formal will have had the exact opposite effect on Manchester City's players?
Yeah, I think you're probably... I'm hearing Jonathan Wilson's inverting the pyramid voice in my head saying football is a game of reaction and counter-reaction. And ultimately, it was the only place that Pep could take his style. When everybody else was zigging, he had to zag. I actually do think that managers do think about the image they want presented of them in boardrooms in 50, 60, 70 years' time, when the photo in Man City of the double winning side are shown. I think he just wanted to look bloody slick. I think he wanted to look timeless. I think he wanted to look debonair. One of the greatest mistakes of my life was when I got married. I wore all I say is that the outfit was zeitgeist. It wasn't classic. Didn't age well. It was a golden bow tie. That's all I'm prepared to tell the world right now. And I
thought you were going to say that when you got married, you wore a shacket.
I wish I'd worn a shacket. Honestly, I wish I'd worn a leather gilet with no bloody shirt underneath, which would have been preferable to what I did wear, which was a flowery waistcoat with a bloody golden bow tie. And when I look at it, my children recoil in horror. They're like, Dad, how could you? And I do think, ultimately, my advice to anyone getting married is just wear a classic outfit, one that looks good on the day, one that's going to look good in 100 years' time. I think that's what Pep is in a legacy mode. That's what I saw with that style mode. And it was the double-double. It fell on. The bookmakers had Manchester City at 8-1 on to win. I think United were 9-2. These are insane odds. These are like back in the Mike Tyson Pomp days when he'd fight a can of tomatoes. I mean, this is how unfancied United were, and it was fascinating to listen to Pep ahead of this one. His message was all, and you don't often get this about Pep. He was warning his team that complacency could be their downfall. He said, this is what happens when you're attempting to become the first team in English men's football history to do the League and FA Cup double. They were looking to win, I think it's the 18th trophy of Guardiola's 8-year tenure at Manchester City. I thought of that in the early exchanges because, yes, City dominated possession, 71% in the first half hour. But United, with Lisandro Martinez repelling all comers at the back, massive game changer for Ten Hag to have his best defenders, bar Luke Shaw, available. And they were able to handle City, who were uncharacteristically sloppy, noticeable mistakes all over the field. Played in that first half like a team who'd been pretty well on the piss, taking turns to quietly vomit in one of Jack Grealish's Gucci bags. Warning shots of United pinging a ball over the top. Warning shots that were ignored until the half-hour mark when Dalot slapped one over the back line. Cue panic between Gvardiol and Ortega. Gvardiol just now so addicted to creating now that he nodded it past his own keeper, leaving Garnacho to pounce for the tap into an empty net. I was astonished, Raw. I don't know if you were. Were you just like Ten Hag tiki-taka?
I was astonished that Gvardiol tried the header. It was obvious that it obviously watching on TV, it's a lot easier than playing in the match.
Yeah, welcome to my life.
It did. As soon as you saw him go up for it, you just thought, as a fan, you just thought, no, don't do that, Josko. That's a bad idea. In terms of the goal, it was hugely against the run of play. It had felt as though City's domination was quite sterile, to use Arsene Wenger's phrase. They weren't really getting at United, and there's no question that Lisandro Martinez has been a huge miss for most of this season with injury, as has Rafa Varane. That is a high quality back line that hasn't really been available to Ten Hag, which is something I'm sure he'll use in mitigation at a certain point in his next job interview, for example. And you could see that that's what United's plan was. Their plan was, look, we are going to have to absorb a lot of pressure. There are going to be huge swathes of this game where we are chasing the ball in the Wembley sunshine, but we will try and catch them on the counter. And yet they got lucky. Gvardiol kind of froze. He made a very poor decision, an uncharacteristically poor decision. But those things happen in football matches, and United were playing those odds.
God, and it would get worse for Manchester City. Don't say those words enough. Within 9 minutes, City in a stupor, playing football at don't you know who I am settings. United made sure it was a scrappy affair, which suited them down to the ground. They almost went full Atalanta on City's Leverkusen and moved from left to right. Rashford freeing Garnacho, who centred to Bruno Fernandes, who, I mean, this was just an exquisite, almost a Bobby Firmino no-look tribute, a wondrously disguised no-look pass to spring Kobbie Mainoo. Oh, that child of Stockport. I'm not a lip reader of great expertise, but I'm pretty sure Kobbie channeled Luka Doncic and screamed, "You mother something, you can't effing guard me," as he slapped home defiantly. Second 19-year-old to score on this day for United. Cue delirium. It was astonishing. In that moment, I do not jest. This felt like a bigger FA Cup set shot roar than Little Stevenage beating Aston Villa.
Yeah, it did feel remarkable. The first goal had the air of a fluke, a stroke of luck, at the very least. The second goal was brilliantly worked. It was an incredibly high-quality goal, the way they picked City's defence apart, culminating really either culminates in the brilliance of the pass from Fernandes, which was a really kind of smart little thing to do, especially the way he made it look like he'd miss-hit a shot. But the run from Mainoo, who I'm pretty sure teleported there, that there is no, if you watch the footage back, he's not actually on the pitch anywhere, and then he's just suddenly 9 yards out from goal. And my favourite, the crowning glory of it, is Kyle Walker's face when he's haring back, sees Mainoo sort of manifest in the penalty area, And you can definitely lip read what Kyle Walker says when he looks at Stefan Ortega. And Walker knows at that moment, well, this is over. They have scored this goal. They have taken us apart. I was out of position. The whole defence has been pulled out of position. And then suddenly Kobbie Mainoo apparently has the gift of teleportation. It was a brilliant goal. And seeing a goal of that quality scored against City is actually quite surprising.
But you use the word surprising as a euphemism for karmic. As a witness, Kyle Walker is the ultimate "do you not know who I am" kind of player as well. It was incredible to witness for two reasons. First, the United goal scorers Kobbie Mainoo and Garnacho started for Manchester United in the FA Youth Cup final at Wembley in 2022, and now they both scored in the first half at Wembley in the real one, and suddenly. Number two, Wembley filled with things we do not see enough. A, United joy, and B, City fan surrender cobras all over the stadium. GFOP at Supports Ball tweeted us the important question. Under the circumstances, does this count as a new manager bounce, Raw? Because for Ten Hag, were the players playing for him or were they playing the occasion?
Probably a little bit of both, although, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, the reaction to the final whistle, I thought, told a fairly significant story. That there was... I've been at games before where the manager is clearly not popular with the players, and you can tell from how those players celebrate an unexpected victory. United's players, not all of them, but a good portion of them, made a point of celebrating with Ten Hag, and that isn't insignificant, I think. It doesn't necessarily mean that they adore him, or that if he goes, that they'll all go on strike and they'll mutiny and they'll demand to leave. Soccer doesn't work like that. But it made it very hard to think that Ten Hag has, and I'm doing air quotes for anyone who's not watching the video, has lost the dressing room. I don't think he's lost the dressing room. I think there's a lot of players there who like him. I think there's a lot of players there who feel that he's been hard done to.
Or feel sorry for him. I mean, I would say John Oliver always says on our show that spite is the rocket fuel of human motivation. The older I get, the more I realise guilt is a pretty powerful one too, Raw.
Yeah, and pity, I think, is a valid emotion, and I think the players have to be relatively emotionless. Just football is a cutthroat business, and you have to look out for yourself, and things happen, and you can't be too sentimental, and that's fine. That's how it has to be. I think the players probably think, if you were to kind of do a word cloud of the Manchester United players' opinion of Erik ten Hag, like nice would be quite big, good bloke would probably feature quite highly. Not necessarily competent would be relatively large as well.
And there'd be one outlying word in the word cloud, Gucci bag. And you'd be like, not now, Jack, not now.
Bald would be massive. Just a massive bald there. But I think you can like a manager and kind of know on some level that he's not that great. I think that is very much a footballer thing to think. Like, this guy's okay, but he's not what we need. And I suspect there's a lot of that in the United dressing room.
Yeah, the hole in the roof, not his fault, is a lot of words to put in a word cloud. But I think there's some of that too. For Pep, though, this was the 9th Wembley final he'd had as a manager. He'd won the previous 8. Suddenly, it was just anger pounding his bottle of water on the sideline. I can actually imagine after this game that we'll see Pep in a stress water commercial that only airs somewhere in Japan. It's got double the alkaline, he'll say as he rages in the commercial like a man who realised that the tactical mistakes were all on him in that bloody suit. The suit was a mistake, should have come out just a sweatshirt with cut off sleeves at half time. But the changes he did make, flung on a Kanji and Doku, impact immediate. Doku, Jink, set up Haaland to smash the ball off the crossbar. It did become one-way traffic. Onana, fine save off a searing Walker drive. Alvarez slipping a close-range chance wide. I did keep thinking down that second half, Arsenal fans must have... I mean, I'm not an Arsenal fan, but I do feel for them. And I wonder what they were feeling watching, almost agog probably, like looking at each other being like, and now Manchester City decide to take a game off? How did you understand it?
I'd extend that to Liverpool fans as well. It felt pretty galling to everybody, to the extent that it was possible to wonder, were City trolling Liverpool and Arsenal?
Was it intentional? Is that what you're saying?
Was this deliberate? Was it a way of saying, we should have lost at any point, and we didn't? And you don't care about the FA Cup. We don't really care about the FA Cup. But look what we took off you by not losing previously. The obvious thing, I know Guardiola after the game took responsibility and said it was all tactically his fault, which is very, very nice of him, very big of him. I mean, to be honest, I suspect the main thing, the clear explanation, the Occam's razor explanation, is that City had spent a good portion of last week celebrating. Yeah. And although they clearly weren't hungover, the intensity probably had dropped a little bit. That the air had been taken out of their season because they'd achieved the thing that maybe not the thing they wanted more than anything else, because that was to retain the Champions League. But, you know, the Premier League title was the thing that had been all-consuming. It was their way of asserting that they were over the defeat to Real Madrid in the Champions League. They had the meeting afterwards saying, right, nothing else stops us now. And I think once you've achieved that aim, it's natural that you drop off by 0.05%. And to be honest, that's probably all you need.
I mean, you drop off and then you get hammered for 48 hours. You try and dry out and miss the wings with some salt and pepper chicken. Your performance is going to drop off. But they did care. I want to be clear, like that. You could see their reaction at full time. There was disappointment. There was agony. There was a photograph of Pep holding his head in agony during the game and Ten Hag looking confident and glorious. Honestly, it looks so unreal. I think I posted it saying, like, if you saw this before the game, you would just assume that the photo was AI generated. It's almost unfathomable when you look at it. But United was so defiant in this game, 27% possession, but so very comfortable at the death. Yes, there was a moment of Onanaing for old time's sake, let a Doku low roller squirm through his hands. But that was that. This was a truly terrible City performance. They missed the chance to become the first team in footballing history on the men's side to double-double. Haaland lumbered to no impact. Kevin De Bruyne looked shattered physically and emotionally. He was given the hook at 56 minutes. There'll be a drumbeat now. Is this his last City game? Is it not his last City game? I don't know how much we read, if anything, into this game, Raw. But it is fascinating that it's become immediately fused to the narrative that's almost breaking as we sit down to discuss today, Raw, that Pep is now musing publicly about the end of his City era, his City empire, possibly coming at the end of his ninth season.
Yeah, and look, to be fair to Pep, he has said pretty consistently, I'm not sticking around for 26 years. Like, he's made it very clear that he doesn't see this as a Ferguson-style, Wenger-style epoch that he is settling in for. I think that has been fairly obvious since day one. And to be honest, certainly when he signed for them in 2016, I would not have said Pep Guardiola will still be at Manchester City in 2024. I would have assumed 2021 at the absolute outside. Granted, that wouldn't have taken into account the pandemic. I personally did not foresee the pandemic. I apologise for that. When making my football predictions, I feel as though I should have factored that in. The most he'd done at either of his previous clubs was 4. He'd done 4 at Barcelona and then 3 at Bayern. It would have felt unrealistic to say he will get close on to a decade at Manchester City, a club that ultimately he has no connection to. You know, it's not a matter of the heart with him at City. So he has always said this day will come. It feels he's been a little bit more explicit about it in the last few weeks. You know, he had said that he thought about leaving after they won the Champions League last season, and then he kind of thought, nah, I'll stick around for another year, see if I can do 4 in a row. I'm guessing that at some point in the next few days he will come up with another new challenge for himself. He'll try and win the Premier League just with left-footed players, or they'll lose their first 3 games and see if they can win it like that.
It's like Larry Bird deciding just to shoot left-handed.
Yeah, exactly. He's just saying, can I do this just with a team full of Paraguayans? He'll do something like that, which would be amazing. There will be a point where, there was always going to be a point where Guardiola would go, and I think that the mood music has been gathering for the last year, 18 months, maybe even 2 years, that he is, as he said, closer to leaving than staying. it wouldn't surprise me if this coming season is his last. But that said, he has said nothing publicly as yet. I don't think it's decided, but my instinct is it feels like a story that has some meat to it.
How do these stories happen? Like, who is the journalist speaking to be briefed off the record about this eventuality?
Well, in this case, it's come from a Daily Mail journalist called Jack Dawn, who I know and is a good reporter. There's no reason to believe that Jack is being misled. He speaks to various people around Pep, I would say, and that he will be reporting the general sense of Pep's entourage.
Oh, in the Peppersphere.
Yeah, in the lower Peppersphere. I
just love the idea that Pep has an entourage. Pep's turtle. You're speaking to Pep's turtle. This is it. I mean, by the way, Pep has still won, even in defeat, 12 of the 24 domestic cups available to him while he's been at City, which is just, we should never normalise that. That is remarkable. That is deeply complicated, obviously. All of you shouting at your pod radios, the number 115. It's a numbing success that caused John Oliver, when he came on last week, to declare that Manchester City have, quote, the soulless inevitability of a combine harvester. But on this day, that combine harvester was shocked and dropped by Manchester United, of all teams. They were the ones who ended Rodri's invincible streak at a just insane 74 games. City, undone by a team that Barney Renee and The Guardian called the leaky roof $1 billion underdogs, which there's a lot in those words to unpack. Erik ten Hag somehow humanly tuned out the traumatic distraction of his imminent demise by conjuring a dogged, deeply defiant performance from his lads. They've been given the 9-2 odds before kickoff. 2 19-year-olds scored. An agonised Pep, his first Wembley final loss in those 9 visits. It's really remarkable. I don't know what emotions Ten Hag experienced. Won the trophy, lost the job, earned the Europa journey. He almost certainly won't be able to walk. Was this the footballing equivalent of a posthumous victory, Rory?
Not quite, because I do think there is a possibility that Ten Hag stays. But in the context, as we talked about the reports coming out beforehand, I think it gave him the perfect riposte to all of the criticism he's had. And he said on British TV afterwards that he thinks some of the criticism has been unfair, to which Alan Shearer, who is not necessarily cut out for a career as a diplomat, said, but you finished 8th. And, Man United shouldn't finish 8th. That's ridiculous. That's a terrible performance in the league for Manchester United. They finished below Chelsea, and Chelsea didn't start playing until January. So the criticism that Ten Hag has faced, to be perfectly honest, has been largely fair. The one thing that it never really took into account is that United this season, particularly, have still been quite a solid obstacle for the big sides. City have beaten them twice in the league, obviously, but they weren't humiliated at any point particularly. They didn't lose to Liverpool, and they only lost very narrowly to Arsenal a couple of weeks ago. United are not useless. They are able to get themselves up for those big games, and that has been a theme with Ten Hag this season. The league performance has been very disappointing. On the league performance, he should be fired. The one's really important mitigating circumstance is they have had terrible injuries. They're having to play a selection of players who they would not want to be in the team if everybody was fit. There's no denying that. You had Diogo Dalot at left back. Neither Martinez nor Varane were fit on Saturday. They'd both come back just for that game. It has been a torrid season injury-wise for Ten Hag, and I think that's the point that he will probably make when he gets a chance to discuss his future. But at least now when he does that, he can look back on the FA Cup win, beating Manchester City, avenging defeat in the final last year. As he said afterwards, if they don't want him to stay, he will go somewhere else and win trophies. That is how he would have approached it, regardless of what the result had been on Saturday. But now it looks an awful lot more legitimate, a lot more authentic. He looks like a guy, look, it's been a terrible season for United. There's a very good chance he doesn't stay. There's a very good chance that no one disagrees with that decision if and when it comes. But he can point to the FA Cup and say, look, I did that. That's me. that's what you're turning your back on, and that's fine. But I know I can win stuff, so I'll go somewhere else and do that.
Well, let's look big picture at the managerial situation, because it is insane. But before we do, I do need to acknowledge the knock-on impact of that shock United win. Chain reaction of aftershocks, really. Small fries, this one. Arsenal now out of the Community Shield. August the 11th, we'll have City playing Manchester United again at Wembley 2, Electric Boogaloo in the Community Shield. But big picture, with Manchester United winning the FA Cup, it means they take a Europa League position for the English allotment. So Chelsea will end up playing Conference League next season. Chelsea, why always them catching strays? But it could be worse, Chelsea fans. Newcastle suddenly out of Europe completely next season, which actually may be a blessing for them. Don't know how the fans are feeling about it, to be candid. But let's talk about the managerial situation, the really curious moment in football that we find ourselves. Football is at the moment just obsessed with managerial firings and hirings. Really just the dominant discussion point of this moment of the off-season in a way I can't remember. Intrigue, moves aplenty. Ten Hag to be fired irrespective of his FA Cup final performance, where we heard Friday morning. But we also realised that was inevitable once news broken before that Manchester United was speaking to Ipswich wunderkind manager Kieran McKenna, also Pochettino. We'll now discover Thomas Tuchel said to be amongst the runners for a future at Old Trafford, which completely undermined Ten Hag before this FA Cup final. New manager needed, partly because Ten Hag clearly had been done in by the madness of toxic United, partly because Sir Jim Ratcliffe, the new controlling owner, is building a new structure for this new manager to fit in. He's got all kinds of advisors surrounding him like a vice. Sir Dave Brailsworth, technical director Jason Wilcox, soon to arrive chief executive, ex of Manchester City, Omar Barada, someone from Newcastle, Dan Ashworth coming in as sporting director, and the FA Cup. We talked about this. It saved Sir Alex Ferguson's job in 1990, but that was a different. FA Cup meant something then. You mentioned Louis van Gaal learned he'd been fired 2016 while he was still on the field after winning the thing. Ten Hag, he's had 2 years at United, 1 year of progress and Carabao glory. Second of traumas, Greenwood, Sancho, Rashford, injuries, massive hole in the middle of the field which could never be tactically closed. Q shot after shot on goal. At Onana, they conceded 660 shots this season. He's left looking a lost man, just baffled, haunted, almost like a Dutch Ned Stark, just beguilingly mystified by the intrigue of the court in King's Landing. A pallor in his eyes that we've seen before on Moyes, on Van Gaal, on Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, even Mourinho. At the trophy presentation, the FA Cup, there was a lovely moment where I think it was Onana handed him the cup. For a second, Ten Hag didn't really know what to do, but then he kissed it and raised it. And post-game, he tried to sound bullish, like he was still going to be there next season. But if this was his last hurrah, as you said, he finished as a winner, handling an awful situation with, I think, a huge amount of class. But Raw, what is going on internally? What sense or what nonsense do you make of it?
I think because you have this new minority ownership who've taken control of, well, in theory, football matters, but also kind of everything else, and they're telling people not to work from home. There is a desire to make an impact, to turn the ship around and to be seen to turn the ship around, that probably mitigates against Ten Hag. It's hard for Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe and David Brailsford, who was the guy who made Britain a kind of success in cycling, which a long time ago was something that seemed very unrealistic, who's now kind of in charge of all of Ineos's football operations. It would be weird for them to be like, well, we've appointed this guy as the chief exec and we've appointed this guy as the technical director and we're signing all these players, but the coach is the same guy who took you to 8th. Like that is a weird dynamic. And I think Ten Hag, to be honest, when that deal went through and when he started to see how much change Ineos was starting to affect, I suspect he probably started to think, well, look, there's no way I get out of this unless we have a kind of major second half of the season turnaround, finish third, win a trophy. There's probably no real hope for staying long term. I don't think he's given up entirely on the idea that he can make a case that his first season was hugely positive. His second season has ended in glory and contained an awful lot of injuries. Maybe it's worth a third. And actually, I think the most compelling argument for keeping Ten Hag, and it's not the most compelling argument you'll ever hear, but the best kind of case that Ten Hag has for him is, who do you replace him with? Who is definitely better? Because that's what we're seeing a lot of around football, is coaches are being sacked and they are being replaced by coaches who, in terms of their CVs, are not upgrades. Who very rarely do you look at the coaches who are being linked with jobs. And Liverpool is a slightly different example here, because Liverpool had Jurgen Klopp, one of the outstanding coaches of his generation, and wanted to replace him with someone younger, hungrier. So they were always going to kind of take a gamble. You're not going to get another Klopp. There isn't another Jurgen Klopp out there. They couldn't go and appoint Guardiola, although that would have been very funny. But the vast majority of vacancies are being filled by coaches who really, strictly speaking, feel a little bit underqualified for those jobs.
That is fascinating. Well, we do need to give some context here, because there is you're referring to the food chain almost of managerial changes that are going on for different reasons. Liverpool, Chelsea, Manchester United, Brighton, West Ham, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, AC Milan, Juventus, Napoli, Feyenoord, Ajax. Also, two of the newly promoted teams, who we'll talk about, Ipswich and Leicester, have got their young managers in the sights of bigger apex predator teams who are lurking. We should unpack a couple of them before returning to the big picture, Raw. We talked last week about Mauricio Pochettino and the discordance that was evident between his 5-game winning run that ended the season, joy, and his outwards demeanour. It was almost like he was blinking in Morse code during his press conferences, being like, "Get me out of here, guys." And on Thursday, Chelsea announced that he and they were separating, Affleck and Lopez style. Club plunged back once again into the chaos and instability that really has, at this point, it's replaced winning things as their DNA. Thomas Tuchel lasted 7 games before being fired under the new owners. Graham Potter, he suffered humanly at the club, really was a broken gent at time of exit. Lasted, I think, 7 months, less than 7 months. And now Pochettino, who tried to grasp that greasy reel of control, proved belatedly he could do it. But then decided he didn't want to after 10 months. Didn't want to continue with the club. He told us, quote, was not his Chelsea. He wanted, the English press are being briefed mostly by Team Poch. He wanted experienced players. He wanted to keep hold of Conor Gallagher. Wanted to not have the Brentford special teams coach jammed into his staff. Question is, Raw, who will take this Chelsea job now? 5 different managers over the last 2 seasons alone, a 6th incoming. But we are living in these crazy days. Then this is what Chelsea are almost a totem of. American equity investor ownership, where it seems like that itself is changing the game. They seem no longer interested in experienced managers who tell them what to do, preferring younger, rawer, yes, bright young things, but also younger people who they can control. I think that's, where Ipswich's Kieran McKenna, to be candid, would be taking a massive risk to his still raw and blemished reputation. See Graham Potter or Leicester's Enzo Maresca. I don't know why they'd eviscerate their bright long futures unless they just love an $8 to $10 million payoff for being fired. Raw, who wants to risk the chaos of being the face of a club who believe their football's great disruptors?
I mean, I would do it for an $8 to $10 million payoff.
Noted.
I'm not
As your agent, yeah. I'm working on it. I might be able to get you the Plymouth Argyle job, but I'll get back to you on that.
Just give me the payoff. That's all I'm interested in, really, to be honest. I think there are lots of things going on all at the same time, and how you balance them up is probably a personal matter. It's the sort of thing that is between a man and his partner in the privacy of their own home. I think in terms of McKenna and Maresca looking at Chelsea, the abiding theory in football is always you catch a lift when you can, because you don't know when it will next come around. If you're either McKenna or Maresca, I think you would look at Chelsea and think, look, I might not get another shot at a, in inverted commas, Big Six club. It might not Leicester might get relegated, Ipswich might get relegated, my stock might fall, I might have to, work for another 5 or 6 years to take that job. And I think in most cases, that logic is pretty sound because football is really fickle and it takes an awful long time to build a reputation. It doesn't take long to destroy one. What I find really strange about Chelsea is I don't understand how in a case this extreme, that logic can still hold. I don't understand if you're Enzo Maresca or Kieran McKenna that you can look at Chelsea and think, I'm going to be the one to change them. There's a level of delusion there that feels excessive.
That Ipswich story is remarkable to me because in old football realities, and by old I mean like 5 years ago, he'd stay at Ipswich, McKenna. Dude is what? He's like 38. I think, is he 2 years management under his belt? Both of them at Ipswich, both of them leading to promotions from League One. This is his team. They have money. They've offered him a sweet new deal. Speaking to people around the club, this is interesting. It's actually what spooked him is this season, seeing the 3 newly promoted clubs get battered pillar to post. He's spooked by that. In the media, there's a lot of talk about how he came through at United under Mourinho, Ole Rangnick as an assistant, and the United job only comes around once a career. Honestly, doesn't though, does it? The United job, it'll be open a couple of times, I imagine, in the next couple of years. I believe he probably wants a safer life raft like the one that Brighton can give, so that he can operate in the Premier League without being eviscerated. But big picture, this is a madness rule. So many big clubs, Chelsea, who controls incoming signings, who has responsibility for medium-term outlays, and this rapid firing of experienced managers. There's almost a distrust of any experienced manager with a proven track record, sudden attraction to young, raw managers who lack any of that. It's almost as if football has become ever more a battle between equity investors and their football coaches, not just for control of their clubs, but for consistency and predictability. That's what financial investors need. They need winning, yeah, but definitely they need sure outcomes even more. The financial returns of top 4 every year, I think, are probably preferred to top 1 once every 5 right now.
Yeah, do you know, I'd not thought of the investor link, and I think that's a really good point. There's other things that I'd point to. So the first is that sacking the manager is always the easiest thing to do. Traditionally, for 130 years, that's what clubs have done. Clubs who underperform will fire their manager because, as the old adage goes, you can't fire all of the players. I think that has actually dovetailed with football's increasing reliance on data. Each individual player is worth a certain number of points, but the manager is worth more points than that. And that number of points that a good manager compared to the baseline manager will get you isn't as many as you think. It's 6, 8, maybe 10. But that's a fairly substantial difference for a team. So the easiest thing to do is to sack the manager. And also, weirdly, the most efficient way of instituting change is to sack the manager. Those two things, I think, have dovetailed. With a third thing, which is that because football is now so stratified, that the same clubs win the same trophies all of the time, that the same clubs occupy the same spaces in the Champions League all of the time, there are more and more clubs who are disappointed. So you have in England 8 teams now, I suppose, who want to get into the Champions League, which means at any given point, 4 of them will have missed out on their primary objective. Those ones this year being Chelsea, United, Tottenham, Newcastle. They all went into this season hoping to be in the Champions League. Now they are not. So that is 50% of the top 8 who will look at their season and think, well, we need to improve. What's the easiest way of improving? What's the most efficient way of improving? It's the manager. And the really interesting aspect to me, and I have written about this, funnily enough, is that it does feel as though there are fewer managers than ever before who are qualified to take those jobs. And, I remember a few years ago when Liverpool appointed Klopp, there was a degree of anger that they hadn't gone and got an English manager from Bournemouth or somewhere. In fact, it may well have been Eddie Howe. Why haven't they appointed Eddie Howe? And the answer is because managing Borussia Dortmund is a much closer match to managing Liverpool than managing Bournemouth. Ultimately, the challenges are the same. You're dealing with players of similar level, similar ability, similar ego, similar expectations. the stadiums are similar sizes, the demands on the club are the same. So clubs will look across Europe and say, well, look, which teams are like us and which teams are a relatively useful learning experience. But there's not many of them anymore because so few teams win trophies. So when Chelsea appointed Jose Mourinho for the first time in 2004, he'd won a European treble with Porto. No one wins European trebles with FC Porto anymore. It's impossible because the same teams win the Champions League all the time. The same teams get to the semi-finals and the quarter-finals of the Champions League all the time. So clubs, if they want to change, which they do because they're more disappointed than ever and also it's the easiest thing to do, they have to take more of a punt on relatively unproven talent. So you have to get the guy who's just got Leicester promoted, the guy who's just got Ipswich promoted.
Do you think that's what it is, Raw? I mean, the disappointment, which I love this working Smith for theory, that it's Heartbreak Hotel that's driving this desperate need to think differently. Because there's another managerial move that kind of we have to factor in to try and unpack this madness right now. It's Vincent Kompany to Bayern Munich. Agreement struck yesterday. Between the clubs, Burnley reportedly getting $13 million for Vincent Kompany, which is a madness. Let me remind you, Vincent is a lovely bloke, great player. But as a manager, he won 5 Premier League matches last season. Only seemed to avoid relegation at last because of the massed points deductions around him. The defence couldn't stop leaking goals in bunches. Football naive. Took far too long to learn lessons. Yes, he's a polyglot. He's fluent in German. Yes, he's charismatic. He's great looking. He's a great face for a team. Yes, he likes attacking football. But, I mean, there's nothing to say that this is a man with an elite tactical brain who can surge in the Champions League crucible. I feel for Harry Kane. I really do. But it feels like the Kompany appointment, Raw, that was the one that made me realise football's become, I almost said this earlier, it's become a little bit like politics, where there's this suspicion of elites. The narrowing move to head coach, which is like the en vogue thing now. Arne Slot, you mentioned him. That's his new role, as opposed to the traditional manager who carried the roles of American sport of both coach and general manager. That's what's led to the oddity of 38-year-old Kieran McKenna and Leicester's Enzo Maresca, who between them have overseen as many Premier League games as you and me, Raw, or any top flight game. They've not done any of it. Why they're being chased by United, Chelsea, and the rest, partly because they know football, but partly because they're young enough and malleable enough to be, theoretically, I use this word loosely, to be bullied into that narrower role. You'll just be the coach. Tell me it's not a madness, Raw.
No, I think that is a massive part of it, but there is another aspect that I find really interesting, which is that you say experienced for managers who've been around the block, but in football in general, as fans, as consumers, as commentators, as observers, do we not see experience as being tarnished by failure? Kieran McKenna, nothing bad has ever happened to Kieran McKenna. Kieran McKenna, apart from having to work for Manchester United, but Kieran McKenna has had 2 years in management and only known success. So you look at him, owners look at him and think, well, this guy wins. Whereas Thomas Tuchel, you know that he's won the Champions League and you know that he's won titles in France and he's, been in charge of Dortmund and PSG and Chelsea and Bayern Munich. But Thomas Tuchel has also failed. He has failures notched up to him. He has lost games to Real Madrid. He has lost his connections to the boardroom at various clubs. And I think that fans have always thought like this. This is a way that fans think.
This theory's amazing.
You know that you are so familiar with these people that you see only the bad bits.
Oh my God.
Or the bad bits sort of loom really large.
When you carry this thinking forward, Raw, who's going to be the first super club who's just going to appoint a large baby? Never done anything wrong. Never said a bad word to anybody. Never upset anybody. Just genuinely never goes anywhere. Doesn't walk even. Just dedicated to his job.
Is that why there are so many bald managers?
Yes. By the way, I'm not sure. How long would it take to notice if every northern super club currently has a bald manager? If you appointed it, who's going to be the first manager? Who's going to be the first bald owner to appoint a large baby as manager? I'm not sure we would notice. I'm not sure we would notice in the north of England at the moment. They fit right bloody in. By the way, talking about large, balding managers, not in the north, in the south, can we just raise a glass to Wayne Rooney agreeing to become manager for Plymouth Argyle? God bless. Team's owner Simon Hallett, an American from Pennsylvania, great friend of this show. Brought the team he loved as a kid after listening to Men in Blazers and deciding he fancied running a football club. What a coup for a team who just missed relegation for the Championship this season. Wayne arriving. I love Wayne. This marriage is in a way like the inverse Vincent Company. We asked what American sporting equivalent this is. Your responses were quite brilliant on Instagram. At Baron John Vogel said, it's like Rick Pitino coaching at Iona. Oh, God bless you, the Gales. At Chorizo Jimmy Churi said, it's like Kevin Bacon coaching in the era. Oh, give some respect to Jimmy Dolan. And then at Original Crons came up with, I think, the best one. Which is the American equivalent would be Wayne Rooney coaching DC United. At Original Crons, email us meninblazers@gmail.com. We'll send you a patch for your beauty and your brilliance. Finally, Raw, we do need to touch upon the game this morning. Back to Wembley, 85,000 packed into the stadium, louder than the cicadas in the Midwest to watch the much heralded richest game in football trademark. Promotion worth an estimated $200 million to the victor. Despite that, we in the States had to experience out-of-sync commentary. Raw, is there anything more frustrating football-wise than watching a game where the crowd's reaction or lack of it tells you about whether what you're about to watch is a goal or a ball blasted wildly under the bar? To me, dislocated sound and picture on a football match, it's up there with the disintegration of democracy in terms of my pet peeves.
It ruins the entire experience, and it's you sit there thinking, I can deal with this, it'll be fine, but you can't. You hate it. You're upset.
You can't.
You want it to stop. You don't know how to
fix it. Why would you? It's terrible. There's nothing worse than John Champion hinting just before, Dan James does the thing, if you know what I mean, that there's just no point in watching it. It is genuinely, But to the game itself, two teams both battling to come right back up. Leeds United opened strongly, their vaunted front line of fast tinies asserting themselves. But Southampton were robust, they were resolute, steadied and readied, which is really the way to approach this game. It's a very odd game of football every year. And on 24 minutes, the most English-sounding man that ever Englished, Will Smallbone, arise, Will Smallbone, fed a stunning ball through the legs of his marker, Ampadu, took advantage of a buckled Leeds defensive line, fed Adam Armstrong, double A, who finished, as he has all season, clinically, ruthlessly. And this game, in his first goal scorer, wins every bloody year. I think since 2010, if you open the scoring, you win. Leeds able to conjure, honestly, very little. Their decision-making breaking forward was at settings known only to Sheffield United. The closest they came in the second half, Daniel James, God bless, yes him, thundering a shot off the crossbar, which is no doubt still bloody reverberating. An agony for Leeds United fans. Those are the margins between glory and remain in the Championship doom. Leeds, God bless, what a season. They won away at both Ipswich and Leicester, but crapped the bed down the stretch. Dismal record, as you said, Raw, in playoffs. I think they've made the playoffs 6 times. They've won none. They're almost like the Cleveland Browns come playoff time. Southampton, dogged. They return to the Premier League where they know they're guaranteed 6 points off Everton Football Club. You have to find your other 34 or so yourself. Agony for Leeds fans. Their chairman, Parag Marath, is the 49ers EVP of Football Ops. Niners 0-2 in finals this year. Raw, Southampton, are they now yo-yoing or are they going to be with us for some time?
Well, Southampton are good. Russell Martin, their manager, is really progressive. He's a really talented young coach. I'm sure that he will be picked off by a club that will sack him within a year.
We're coaching Brazil at the next World Cup.
They will be good to watch, Southampton. They'll play good football. He won't abandon his principles. I think they will get what is technically known as a tonking once or twice at various points. But they are good enough to stay up ordinarily. The problem that everyone's going to have next season is who are the three that are going down? Because this season we were a little bit spoilt for choice. That you kind of knew that Luton, Burnley, and Sheffield United would all struggle to some extent. I don't think we realised don't think we necessarily assumed they would struggle to the extent that they have. But next year, Leicester will be strong. Ipswich, okay, will be difficult, especially if McKenna leaves. Southampton will be favourites to go down just because they came up through the playoffs. And because, are Palace going to be relegation fodder? Probably not. They look like Brazil 1970. Forest will invest again. Everton won't get points deductions, or won't get nearly as many points deductions. So I think that relegation next year will be very tight, and it will be especially difficult to avoid for the three promoted teams for the same reason as you mentioned earlier, that the gap between the Championship and the Premier League is now so vast that even those teams who yo-yo in and out every year, I think they find it harder and harder to stay in.
Only way to stay up is just one of you, just appoint a large baby. Do it, coward.
There you go.
Oh, I'm just creating solutions.
You just want jobs, more jobs in football for large babies.
Oh, Raw, that is it for today. We've made a lot out of a little. We will be back tomorrow with a trophy so European night, breaking down the forthcoming Champions League final, as well as the Conference League that we love so much. I'll be live at the final whistle Wednesday of that one with the mighty Nedum Onua. Oh, I love that man. Admired him so bloody much. Cannot wait to chat to him. Come and join me on YouTube for that one. Los Angeles listeners, save the date, June 19th. We'll be playing a Copa America preview, a night of 1,000 stars in your fantastic city. It's quite a spectacular show. Save the date, brace yourselves. Oh, but Raw, it has been a joy to spend Memorial Day with you, you beautiful human being. It's not bank holiday, is it, in England Monday?
It certainly is.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, what are the Smiths doing?
We're going swimming.
It's big.
Then we're going to my parents.
God.
Very exciting.
Did not get my invite, but that makes me so bloody joyful. That really...
You can come to Stips and Splash Time if you want, Rog.
I've never... You know what? I've envied it long and from afar. No football tomorrow. I honestly don't really know what to do with myself. But I just say, it's a joy to speak to you, to watching football together, to not taking a second of it for granted, to making memories together. Huge love, big love, courage.